You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you once again for another week. Still cold outside. Still not warm. Really looking forward to that heat. But you know what? It signals spring football. And we're going to talk a lot about spring football and maybe a few other things that's going on in the University of Utah. But it's a spring football episode, so let's get cracking with it. But first, let me tell you about our partners, UFirst Credit Union. With your UFirst Rewards checking account, you can earn monthly reward points for buying something special for your best friend. Then you can redeem your reward points for something special for yourself. And with no monthly maintenance fees plus free ID theft protection, you can love that the UFirst Rewards checking is big on perks and peace of mind. Put your checking account to work for you so you can spend more time doing more rewarding things. It's easy rewards checking with UFirst Credit Union. Check out the full details at uFirstCU.com. All right, we're going to just jump right into to spring camp. So this is, the second full week of a spring camp. They did have some stuff that first week that was kind of like a Thursday, Saturday type stuff, but last week was a first full week. This is the second week. We're getting on. It doesn't matter. They're knee deep in spring camp, and we're starting to figure out a few things, right? Like there's still not a full understanding of everything that's going to happen in fall, and quite honestly, that's what spring is. But we're getting some answers, and things are starting to take some shape. So before we get into this, I'm going to just play the full Kyle Whittingham audio. I don't generally like to do this, but I think this is going to provide some good context in terms of what's going on. I can give you kind of my take on what I saw yesterday at practice, as well as kind of what I've seen the last few times that I've been there. But we're just going to go with Whittingham's audio. We'll have him kind of set the stage for everything, and we'll go from there.
Okay, ladies and gents.
Kyle, another week. How's things going?
Yeah, we're progressing. It's I would say we're on schedule. We're now in the middle third of spring ball. Practices the next 5, 6 through 10, and so far we've made a lot of progress. Some guys are stepping up. Really impressed with Bird Ficklin, the quarterback, true freshman. He's doing some good things. Running backs are showing a lot of promise. Still got to sort things out at wide receiver. That's a position right now that is still we're trying to determine who the real go-to guys are going to be, and it's going to be a process that'll probably take all the way through spring and maybe into some fall camp. But we've got to get that decided. Offensive line, as advertised, got a good group up front. Defense running around making plays. So a lot of good things in the first 6 practices.
For that wide receiver room, is there anybody that you feel confident in, or is it more just kind of a pecking order type situation?
No, we feel confident in a bunch of them. It's just who's going to step up consistently and make plays. And so it's not like we're searching for a guy that can catch the ball or make a play. It's who's going to step up and be the go-to guy, because that has to happen.
What sort of progress have you seen from tight end Landon King?
Landon's done a nice job. He's put some weight on. He's about 10 pounds heavier than he was last year, so that's helped him. And he's kind of a hybrid. He's not really a true hand-in-the-dirt tight end, and he's not really a true H-back mover. He's a tweener. But I think we're using him in a lot of good ways and doing some different things with him. Dallin Bentley, speaking of tight ends, is really having a really good spring camp. For the first 6 days, he's been at his best. He's definitely playing his best football since he's got here. And so we feel like the tight end spot, although not as much 12 personnel and personnel groups with 2 tight ends that we've used in the past, they're going to still be a big factor.
You moved Hunter Andrews from linebacker to running back to linebacker, and now he's at tight end.
Yeah. Well, he's a hybrid. He's more a running back tight end / guy. He's not really a true tight end. But anyway, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what have you seen from him through these first 2
weeks?
Good things.
Good things. He's a typical big back when he's in the backfield. Does a great job in blitz pickup. He's got excellent speed. He's a 4.4 kid, so he's got the ability to go the distance. He was a really good running back in high school, over 1,000 yards his senior year, and he's also doing a lot of things at the tight end spot. So he's one of those guys, kind of like Nate Johnson, that's playing several positions.
How's Ryan Davis looked, and how's his connection, with Devin coming from New Mexico?
Yeah, Ryan's done a nice job, and he obviously has a leg up knowing the offense, just like Devin does, and just like running back Rogers does. But he's a guy that shows up every day, works hard, and really is going to add to what we're doing.
Do you feel this offense suits your offensive line and their strengths well?
I do. It's a run-heavy offense in a lot of ways, and our offensive line loves to run block, and I think that it's a really good fit for the personnel that we have up front.
You mentioned Bird. What was the biggest thing that stood out from him so far?
Well, just he's getting really good command of the offense. He's got a big-time arm. His arm is live, and he's accurate. And so he's put on some weight. He was a little thin when he got here, but he's put on like 15 pounds since he's got here. And he is really starting to feel comfortable in the offense and doing things that we saw him do in his high school tape.
You said that Wayshawn had the inside track on the running back. Who are the guys behind him that you're starting to see that could push him?
Well, Rogers is doing a good job. Daniel Bray, the freshman, is a guy that he's a little different type of back. He'll have a role for us. Hunter Andrews is doing a nice job there. Nate Johnson's also getting some reps at running back. And also when you have a quarterback like Devin Dampier, who rushed for over 1,100 yards last year, that's part of the running game and part of the run game production. So, we expect him to be a big part of it here as well this year.
Have you started to see any separation in the cornerbacks room?
Corners, well, Scooby Davis seems to have a really good hold on one of the outside spots. Smith Snowden's got the nickel spot locked down right now, and so the battle is really for that corner opposite Scooby. And right now I'd say Blake Cotton is doing some good things, as is Donovan Saunders, and who else was showing up? But Tristan Thompson's doing a nice job. So.
What about behind Smith? Behind Smith in the nickel?
Benny, Jackson Benny is doing a nice job there. And some other guys that were, the nickel's kind of a specialty spot. So we're trying to get the outside solidified first. Then we'll determine who's going to really be the backup or the third nickel.
All right. So that was a lot of talk about the offense, and for good reason. I think that's kind of the attention that everybody has each year, just simply because the defense has just been so consistent. There isn't a lot of questions for the defense. Granted, there are more questions for this defense than there have been in years past, but it's maybe not as similar as the offense. Obviously, Utah went through a full reset in their offense, brought in a new offensive coordinator, brought in a whole bunch of staff to complement that, and then went into the transfer portal and brought in an entirely new roster, essentially. So obviously there's some holdovers, and we'll talk about some of those guys. But this is an offense that, as Kyle said, is on progress, right? Like, the team is on progress in terms of what they're doing. And I don't know what a lack of progress or behind progress or ahead of progress would be necessarily at spring. But they feel at least they're on par with what they need to do, right? And I think that's a good place to be. Obviously, if you were advanced, that would be better. I would argue that maybe they're on par simply because of Devin Dampier, with Jason Beck, just having that familiarity that allows Utah to be able to kind of hit the ground running far better than what it could be, right? Now, with that being said, early on, the defense was absolutely dominating this Utah offense, right? Like, that's to be expected given, the change in a new system and everything that way. But with that said, I mean, this offense has grown, right? In just a week's time period from, when we get to watch these practices, this team, has shown a lot of different looks. There's been a lot of creativity. My favorite thing about watching this offense right now is there's a lot of pieces that they're just throwing in there, right? You've got a lot of pieces, whether that be, Hunter Andrews that they were talking about, or, a bunch of other guys that can kind of get thrown in there. Nate Johnson, so to speak. You get them in there, and they can utilize a lot of different sets, right? You can put Nate Johnson in there, and you can say, hey, you're going to line him up at quarterback and maybe flex out Devin Dampier just for kind of like a quote-unquote trick play. But there's so many things that you could do with that if, you decided to, do something like that, you can have Nate continue to run the ball, right? You can just say, oh, the defense is going to key in. Nate Johnson is in the backfield. They're going to put him in as a run option, right? Well, there's so many things that can come here where suddenly he can be your quarterback. I don't think this is a long-term strategy, right? Like, you want the ball in Devin Dampier's hands, but I think Utah can be very flexible with what they do in just a simple look like that, right? You have a guy that comes in there that understands schemes. He understands coverages. He understands different things and understands how to diagnose it from the beginning of the play, pre-snap reads, that kind of stuff. And that allows Utah to be able to do a lot more things than they haven't done in the past, right? Now, like I said, you don't want to get too cute, right? You don't want to do things that are going to make it more challenging for the team if all you're doing is running, trick plays or whatever. But I think this is going to be the norm for Utah in the sense that they're going to have a lot of things that they can look at, where you can say, I'm just going to stay focusing with that Nate Johnson. If you can continue to utilize him and kind of get a defense comfortable and saying, okay, look, that's how we're going to be, this is how Utah's going to run it every single time when Nate Johnson gets thrown out there, and then suddenly you flip the script on him. Now you've got that defense reeling, right? Now you've got them thinking a lot. Now you've got them knowing that, okay, the next time that he comes out is now this time going to be a pass, is it going to be a run? It's those types of things that make a great offensive coordinator effective, especially as a game develops, right? Those first few plays, let's say Nate Johnson runs, whether he's in the Wildcat or whether he's in the backfield as kind of a designated running back type situation, if you utilize him in that way and he's just getting, 3-4 yards, maybe he breaks a few and gets some, that's going to be something that leads to further development in the game. Okay, yeah, he's getting 3-4 yards, 5 yards, whatever it may be. Now suddenly the defense, treats it like that. They come in and, Nate Johnson blows them on a weak side with a pass, to whomever, right? Like, you can see things starting to develop already in spring, right? And that's just one usage of kind of a player, but you've got a lot of guys that can be multifaceted in how they approach the game, right? Starting with Devin Dampier. You get a guy in there that has been, I would say he has improved, especially in his passing from the time that we've seen him at the beginning of spring camp to now. In just that short time, you're starting to see some development there. Now, once again, this is spring, so it's hard to know how that will translate to fall and when the reps are live and, he's under duress and people are coming at him, right? But there was some throws that he made yesterday specifically that I haven't seen, him make in all the time that we've been here. He's hitting guys in stride. He's finding the open man. He's hitting it into tight windows. He's getting guys into tight coverage, different things that he's been able to connect on passes. Is everything perfect? No, but at the same time, it's far more impressive these last few weeks, or this last week specifically, than what we saw early on. Now, beyond that, his ability to just escape the pocket is pretty remarkable. There's a few times where that defense really broke through yesterday, and Devin is just able to, it looks like he's going to get a sack, right? Like, it just looks like the pocket is collapsing. He's not going to get out of this, and suddenly he just zips out of it, and he's gone. Now, they're not tackling him, right? Like, these aren't live. I'm curious to know that if a defender was fully pursuing, and not trying to just kind of hold up a little bit. But in the same vein, I don't know that there would be much of a difference yesterday based on what I saw. I think he assesses the situation. He stays in the pocket as long as he needs to. He doesn't look necessarily to run first unless it's a designed play. And when he needs to run, he'll run, right? Now, he's going to make his mistakes, and obviously a lot of fans, are really worried about his durability and can he withstand hits and all that kind of stuff. And that's the question that's going to remain, for as long as he's going to play. But I think how he does it, he evades tackles in a way that, in theory, should help him kind of negate some of these injuries, right? Anything can happen, right? Like, that's the nature of this game, and it's a challenge, and it may not even be a hit that he takes. That can be a challenge. But you're seeing a lot of flexibility in what Devin does. I will say there was a second-string offensive lineman that just, on one play, and it's one play, right? Like, it happens. He just absolutely got lit up, and I'm not going to name names, but he got absolutely lit up in the defensive. It was actually Smith Snowden just broke through that line so fast. And, Smith is good, but I don't think it was one of those things that's a thing that Smith is going to be able to do all the time. But I mean, he got through that so quick, and he would have sacked Dampier so fast if not. Like, there's nothing Dampier could have done. I mean, it was a phenomenal play by Smith Snowden, but I think it was just more of a breakdown in the play and more than anything. But it shows what Smith can do, but it also shows that, Devin, for the most part, can get out of most situations. I'm curious to see how teams will try to compete against him, try to, bull rush him or whatever it may be. Especially with the type of athletes that they're going to put in the backfield. You've got Wayshawn Parker back there. You could put Nate Johnson. You could put Hunter Andrews. You could put a whole slew of players back there and be pretty dynamic. There can be option plays. There can be just set run plays. There can be just so many things with this offense, and so I think there's a lot of creativity there that has a lot of people excited, and I think it's not so overly complicated that it gets players thinking too much, right? Landon King, talking to him yesterday, said that this, coming from a pro-style offense where he's like, you got to look at certain things, and you got to make sure this and that and this. He said there's so many things about this offense that is easy. He actually called this offense easy. And to a large extent it is. And yes, it's going to be very heavy in the run game, and that's exactly what Utah emphasizes, and they're getting back to more of their roots. But I would say it's more dynamic of a run system than what they have had, right? There is going to be an emphasis in running, but there's an emphasis on just being able to create the best play possible. And now that sounds simple and it sounds, overly simplistic, I would say, but at the same time, that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to get these guys so they don't overcomplicate things. They're trying to get them so that they can come into this offense and they can try to be a playmaker immediately. One of the biggest frustrations that Utah players had, especially those transferring into the program, coming into Andy Ludwig's system, is that they just didn't know how to utilize that system to the full extent, right? There's a lot of checks that you had to have. You had to look at the quarterback. Is he checking out of something? You had to look at what was going on, at the defensive coverages. There's a lot of things that these guys had to learn. And while that can potentially, help them as they get toward the NFL style, Utah players weren't even going to get there simply because they weren't able to get into this system quickly. And, I think there's been a need for Utah to be able to just basically say, we need to figure out this transfer portal, and we need to be able to, move forward with this and say that we can get into a quick situation that allows these players to move and get them into a better spot, right? You're not coming in here trying to learn the Bible. You're coming in there trying to kind of fine tune some things that you've already learned into your system throughout your college ranks or your high school ranks or whatever it may be. These are pretty similar stuff that help. So pretty impressive stuff for Utah and just kind of what they're able to do. But I think this kind of shows the dynamic assets that Utah has and what they're able to do to be able to kind of move forward. So with that said, there's still a lot of passion with this team. There's a lot of guys that are in there that are competing at a high level. You had a little scuffle in the media session that we had. Nothing serious, but enough guys that they're charged up for play and they want to be able to kind of compete at a high level. And so you're able to see kind of that passion, and it wasn't anything that was bad, but I think this is part of the nature of football, right? You want guys that care. You want guys that want to get in there and they want to have, something that matters. And the fact that they're doing that in spring, I think is a good sign of things to come. So now with that said, I'm going to kind of try to break down some of these positions and kind of see where we're at. You obviously heard Kyle and what his take was on all that, and obviously his opinion matters more than mine. But I'll try to give a little bit more context to what he gave and kind of stuff that way. But let's start with the quarterback position. Obviously, Devin Dampier, as I mentioned, he's showing improvement each week. This is something that has been great for them. He has a command of the offense. He understands what's going on. And as I mentioned, he's also shifty, right? Like he's a guy that can just do a lot of things. And if his passing can continue to improve, this becomes a valuable asset for Utah. weeks and weeks ago when he first committed to Utah, I said that there is a legitimate path to him towards getting a Heisman-type look, right? Now, obviously, a lot of things have to hit, but I think the type of player that he is exactly what a Heisman player kind of, or what type of a player benefits from that Heisman look, right? If he's able to have that season where he can continue to improve, and especially if he can get Utah to, I don't think they have to be the fourth best offense in the country at Utah, but if you can get anywhere near that with Devin Dampier, that shows a lot of good progress for Utah. You can do that at New Mexico, right? But can you do that in a power conference at the Big 12 where you can go in and do that and show that? If he can be in that kind of conversation, that's going to show a lot of potential for Utah. And that's a lot of trust to put on a quarterback. But at the same time, I think, he's living up to that, right? And I think he's wanting to be able to have that. But more importantly, this is a guy that is coming in here and he's got the command of the team. He's helped change the vibes of the team. People are excited about it. In my opinion, it's very similar to the first few years that Cam Rising was there and Utah was winning at a high level, and there was a lot of great vibes. Now, I'm not saying that was Cam Rising's fault these last few years, but I'm just saying it was those early years where when things are good, and you haven't necessarily faced that adversity yet, everybody is on the same page, everybody's excited, everybody wants to go. And that has a tendency to kind of translate into the offseason, then it translates into fall camp, and it can translate into the season. Obviously, you have to win games, and you have to be able to be effective on the field to be able to make this work. And Utah's going to get a tough test immediately by going on the road to UCLA. But I think those are those things where, with Devin Dampier, if they can continue to make that progress, this shows good things for Utah, right? If he can go show out at the Rose Bowl against UCLA, it's not going to be this most earth-shattering thing, but the fact that you can now do that against a Big Ten team in your first game, in your first season with the Utes, that can bode really well for, whatever future accolades that he could get. I'm not trying to sit here and say that he's going to be in the Heisman mix, right? I'm saying he's the type of player that can be in that, and a lot of things have to go the right way. But with the offense that Utah has created, there are chances for him to be able to be closer to that conversation than I think people want to admit. Now, once again, the passing has to continue to develop. And if it continues to show the way that we have seen with these last few weeks, I think that means a lot of good things for them. So we understand Devin Dampier. We understand, what's going on there. He made one pass to Dadrian Zipperer down the sideline on a go route. That was phenomenal. He hit him in stride. The problem there was it got called back because of an illegal man downfield. One of the guys was, one of the offensive linemen was a little too excited and got too far downfield. But, it shows his ability. With that note, Zipperer just absolutely blew by the coverage. He was open. It didn't necessarily show a lot of finesse from Dampier, but it definitely showed, he could hit him in stride and he found his target quickly. So a great play and great for him. As we've seen the last few weeks, Isaac Wilson continues to be QB2. And, I don't know if that is a situation of just his experience. And so getting in there, it's easy to have him there and other guys are working in. But it's been pretty clear that he's getting a majority of the reps outside of Devin Dampier, right? And so I don't know if that means he's going to continue to go into the season as QB2. There was a lot of talk going into this that there was a potential redshirt season for him, allow him to be able to really develop and grow. But by all accounts, it seems like he's been in the mix there. Now, everything hasn't been perfect for him. There's some things. I think there was a few situations yesterday where he reverted a little bit to last season where he holds onto the ball too much. But for the most part, I would say that he's actually getting the ball out much quicker. He's hitting his guys well. There was one series that just didn't work for him. But by and large, it's been, I would say, better than what we've seen. I think there's been some progress made there, but Utah's really going to need to solidify that position. If Isaac Wilson is going to be the guy at number 2, they have to feel really confident in it. It can't just be, we love Isaac Wilson, we've promised him this, or whatever that may be. This has to be a situation where Utah is fully committed and set on their QB2 this year. Obviously, with a guy like Dampier, who he's going to run the ball a ton, and he factors into that, and you heard Kyle Whittingham talk about that, where he's going to factor into the run game a ton. You need to have a viable QB2. And I'm not saying that Isaac can't be that guy. Isaac absolutely can be that guy. And I think, the thing that's probably fresh on most fans' minds is how he finished the season and how frustrating it kind of was simply because of the lack of confidence he started to get or lose, right? He's a confident kid. He understands what he needs to do. Giving himself one more year in a system that fits his strengths a little bit more, I definitely think helps him. But we have to continue to see that progress, and he's not going to shy away from that. He understands that, and he obviously has to take ownership in that and continue to improve. But I think if Utah really wants to be effective this year, they have to have a solid QB2. Now, with that said, you did hear that Kyle Whittingham said he's been pretty impressed by Bird Ficklin. He's a freshman quarterback coming in this year. Really talented kid. You can see a lot of why Utah was so excited about him. Kind of an underrated recruit. I would say probably more because of his size. He's not the biggest kid. He needs to put on a lot of muscle, right? And I think he needs to develop and kind of just get through that first year, especially of the strength and conditioning program, come in here in the offseason and really work hard. I want to see how he develops going into fall. Some guys just don't put on a ton of weight, right? Like they're not just able to just put in 20, 30 pounds of muscle in the off season and be ready to go by fall time. But I think if you can show some continual strides from him, you can continue to give him some good looks. This is a guy that absolutely could be in the mix in the future. I don't think Utah wants him to be in the mix right now. I would say he's kind of, in terms of his size, is probably more slim like Jaden Daniels was when his first year came. Really thin guy, but he can sling the rock, right? Like he can get the ball out. He's got a great arm. We saw some great passes from him yesterday. The first time that I've seen him in terms of getting most of the reps at QB3 reps, and he did well. He was going up against, second and third team defenses, but he was doing well. He was showing some promise, and I think there's some good there for Utah. But I'm really curious to see kind of how all this develops. Now, the one question that I have had, and I haven't had a chance to ask in a limited scrum with Kyle Whittingham, but is Brendan Zurbrugg, the transfer quarterback that's come in. I haven't really seen anything from him. I'm curious to see if he's factored in, kind of what's going on there. Is he injured? Those kinds of things. So I'm curious to see there. My understanding was he was going to come in and probably compete more for that backup spot, that QB2 spot. But we haven't seen anything from him. So really curious to see there. But I think this battle will obviously continue through into fall. Really curious to see, as I mentioned, Isaac's progression, what he's able to do in the offseason, and kind of his development. But I think you're going to see some of this at the spring game. And I think that'll be the most fascinating part of this. Look, they're going to be vanilla defenses, right? Utah's not going to show everything. Really curious to see how it goes, but I'd have to imagine that Devin is on one side and Isaac is on the other side, and then they're going to compete, and then you're going to get Bird Ficklin, Zurbrugg, unless he's injured, some of these other guys in there and kind of see what goes on. But I think this could be a good battle and, continue to go on. But right now it is, it's looking more for QB2 than anything, obviously. That's no surprise. What you did hear from Kyle is that, wide receivers need to progress, right? He's not worried necessarily about the pass catching ability, but more about consistency, more about finding a guy that can just be the guy, right? Not being able to have a true threat come back after last season. Dorian Singer obviously lost his appeal. That hurts Utah in the sense that they don't have a true threat that has been the guy. Now you've got guys that have showed out, right? Like even in the periods that we've been able to see. As I mentioned, Dadrian Zipperer has been great. Creed Whitmore was doing really well yesterday, especially in the screen passes. He was able to make a lot of yardage out of just simple screen passes, which sounds funny because Utah for years, always loved their bubble screens, right? And they would always get blown up before the pass even got to them. They would develop so slowly. They didn't work. Utah, at least from this vantage point, has done a much better job of being able to utilize the screen pass in a way that is beneficial. Now, whether that is something that Utah will utilize a ton, I don't know. I think they're just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks at this point. But you do have guys that can be effective there. And Whitmore is a shifty guy. I mean, like, he gets that ball and he immediately can make some extra yards after the catch. He's been able to do a lot of good things there and get some extra yards. So that's a guy that I think will have some future. Ryan Davis, you heard Kyle talk about him, kind of has a leg up in the offense. Varying times, you see some progress with him. He's had some great catches in all this, but I'm curious to see how he factors into it. Zach Williams is a guy that's been in there as well. We haven't heard as much about him as I think fans would want, especially with how he finished at the end of the season. So, I'm curious to see how this kind of all shakes out, kind of see how it develops. I will say that Utah is utilizing a ton of different guys, right? So I wouldn't read into one thing if you don't hear about a certain guy. In just the few practices that we've been able to go to, there hasn't been one solidified guy, right? Like, there's been somebody different each time, and they're throwing the ball around throughout all the practice. To me, as much as you want to be able to have that guy that you get the ball to, I also think that this is a strength for Utah in the sense that they can come in here and be able to have multiple guys that they can throw to. Now, with that being said, you want to have somebody that can be your go-to guy. You want that X receiver, right? That wide receiver one who can come in there and be that true threat. They've got to find that, and they've got to determine that. But I think the way that this offense is built, I think that's why Kyle isn't necessarily as worried. And look, the jokes make themselves. Utah doesn't pass it to wide receivers anyway, so why should Kyle be worried, right? But I don't think that's necessarily the case here. I think it's they have a lot of talented receivers, and they believe in them. And I think based on this current offense, there doesn't have to be one set guy immediately. Obviously, you want to keep developing that, and you want to continue to be able to have guys that can show out. But I think they've got enough interchange in this offense that allows them to be able to kind of be flexible. And the players that are going to make plays in certain situations are going to be there, right? And so just as we continue to see consistency with these guys, I'm curious to see how this develops for Utah. Utah hasn't been shy about passing the ball in practice. So it's not one of those things where it's all just been run. Okay, guys, we're going to do this. Even the run game has been creative. But at the same time, I think this is a good balance of what Utah can be. I think this gets Utah actually closer to that 50-50 range in terms of pass and run like Kyle Whittingham wants, but they will emphasize the run first, if that makes sense, right? They're going to use everything from the run vantage point, and it makes sense based on who you've got in the backfield to be able to set everything else up. And so, as long as the run game is efficient, that offensive line continues to dominate the way that they should, I think this is a team that can have a lot of success. So, like I said, don't read into a lot of this wide receiver stuff yet. Obviously, if it gets closer to fall and we're still getting into this where Utah hasn't found a bona fide guy that they feel confident in, maybe start worrying a little bit more. Even then, like I said, it's more of a distribution of talent within the ranks of the wide receivers instead of just isolating one. And I think to some extent that also helps a quarterback like Devin Dampier, who can just find guys that are open. Sometimes we saw quarterbacks that they developed great relationships with them, but that was who they keyed in on several times, right? Even if they were open or not. And obviously the play calling is there. And I don't know the full system in terms of what Andy was calling, if that look was always there, but sometimes this allows you to go through your progressions and kind of get in there. So you can give and take some of the stuff. Obviously you want that guy, but I think, this isn't the end of the world if Utah doesn't have a set order immediately as to who their guys are. So there's that. Running back, let's jump into that. Obviously, Wayshawn Parker is the top dog. Kyle didn't shy away from that in his comments this week, and that's going to be who it is. But at the same time, there's different guys that are going to factor into this. And I've been really impressed with Daniel Bray. As you heard Kyle say, he runs a different style, but he continues to factor in that offense. And you're seeing it every single week in how he's able to do things. He's running with some intensity. He's shifty. He's able to get into the system and really kind of dominate. So, needs to put on a little bit more weight, but he's also a different style than a Wayshawn Parker, who's a much more bruising type of running back. There's going to be a lot of opportunities between these two. I was really impressed with Devin Green yesterday. He showed a lot of good progress there, more so along the lines of Wayshawn Parker, but in a different way. I think he's got the ability to kind of mix it up and go outside, go inside. Obviously, it's transferring in. I believe it was UNLV. I can't keep all these straight, but I'm pretty sure that was it. But a guy that comes in there was former teammates with were teammates with Wayshawn Parker in high school. They've got a good chemistry there. This is a room that I think has a lot of potential. And then, as Kyle said, you got Hunter Andrews and Dampier in there that are going to factor into that. You also have to put in there Nate Johnson. There's going to be a lot of different guys in that room. And Wayshawn will kind of be the leader, but there's going to be so many different looks back there, whether it's a 2-back set or 1-back set, whatever it may be. I think Utah's going to have a lot of success there. So there's no worry there necessarily. Guys are progressing. Things are moving on. Moving on to the tight ends. We talked to Landon King, and he had some pretty funny quotes from us or for us, and I want to play one of them because it kind of highlights the situation that a lot of people have talked about. Coming into fall or spring camp, a lot of people want to look at Jason Beck's offense last year and say he didn't do anything with tight ends. And so does that mean that Utah's not going to have anything for their tight ends? Is that was one of the kind of knocks that everybody was looking at to say, oh, Landon King's going to transfer, among many others. But, there's a lot of that where he doesn't look to his tight ends. So, what does that mean for Utah? Kyle did address that, right? That it's not necessarily to that point. But I think my favorite answer was from Landon King.
Coach Beck's offense, at least last year, wasn't as big a role. What's your feeling and the room's feeling about that?
Well, we got tight ends over here. I don't know what they had in Mexico, but we got tight ends over here. So, the thing with Coach Beck's offense, like the playmakers are going to make plays. Playmakers are going to get put in the spot. So if you're a playmaker, you're going to get put in that spot. So,
just a little shade. Just a little bit. I think he's true, right? What he says is true, I should say. Utah has a great system of tight ends, whether that be Landon King, Dallin Bentley, now Hunter Andrews, who is kind of this hybrid guy. He's a running back / tight end. He can do it all, kind of mix it up in a lot of different ways. The thing is, Landon even pointed out that Hunter Andrews is the Brant Keithy of the offense, right? He said he didn't want to say that, but he thinks that he very much so is a Brant Keithy kind of prototype, we'll say. And I think if you can get guys that can do a lot of different things, Landon can mix it up on the line. He can also be a great pass catcher for Utah. Utah's done some things to scheme to him in spring camp to be able to get him the ball. I don't think this is a situation where, Jason Beck is not going to look to his tight ends. And I think that's to the point that Landon says the skill set of these players is at a higher level than what they had at New Mexico. And this is a system that when Beck is confident in you, he calls it a circle of trust. If you're in his circle of trust, there's going to be a situation where you're going to get the ball, right? You're going to be in the mix. Now, that doesn't mean you're always going to get it, and there's going to be other factors, but I think this shows that Utah is going to run some tight end looks, right? There's going to be some tight end sets. It's not going to quite be the 12 personnel that we're used to, not even 13 or 14, whatever you want to call it. There's going to be less of those looks. But that's not to say that Utah won't run some of those things. There's a lot of things that they can do to be creative with these tight ends, especially with the guys that they have, guys that are pretty dynamic that can, bring down the ball, can run the ball, mostly with Hunter Andrews in that system. But you've got a great situation going on for Utah where they can kind of be dynamic. So really fascinated to see what it is. I think Landon King is able to have a breakout season, which sounds crazy, in his senior season. But, I think coming into Utah in his sophomore year, there was a lot of hope and optimism that he was going to be this guy simply based on kind of the year that he had there. It wasn't the most earth-shattering, right? It was one of those seasons where He had, moderate success, and when he got the ball, he did a lot with it, and that kind of was what led people to think that the next year, his junior season, was going to be a breakout year. Obviously, things didn't go as planned for that offense. As part of that, King kind of fell out of the rotation for whatever reason. Doesn't need to get into that right now. But, he only had 3 catches on the year. And, that alone was a reason for him probably to transfer, right? A lot of people thought that he was gone. He wasn't factoring into the offense a ton. Had he lost a spot, that kind of stuff. The reality is he's committed. And he wants to be at Utah. He believes that the vibes are good. He feels the culture is good. He thinks this offense is so much easier. And he feels like everybody is kind of hitting at the right level, right? Like that tight end room, he's excited to have a guy like Hunter Andrews in there. He's excited to have a guy like Dallin Bentley in there. Like they're excited as a group to be able to do things. And so they feel confident in their position group that if they get a play call or whatever they need to do to be a part of this team, they're going to be able to do it. And I think he's right. I think Landon King can be an efficient guy for this team. I think he can be a guy that is a full team player. He always has been a team player while at Utah. And I think there's a lot of optimism for this position group, even though it hasn't been talked about as much. You're going to get the run game. You're going to get the wide receivers involved. You're going to get the tight ends involved. You obviously have a great offensive line that Utah feels really optimistic about and believes that it can be one of the best in the country. And so I think there's a lot of things that are kind of lending to the support that the tight ends will be fine and they'll be able to factor in. And, with that point, if the wide receivers aren't kind of that top notch in terms of being able to have that guy, maybe it is in that tight end room, right? Maybe it is Landon King. Maybe it is Hunter Andrews. Maybe it's somebody else. They can be efficient in this offense, especially as defenses are trying to look at that run. If they key in on that run ton and Utah does things to be able to make it look like they're doing that, these tight ends are going to be open. And that allows Utah to be able to have a lot of flexibility in what they do and kind of moving forward that way. So I think there's a lot of hope from this offensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. I think it's easy to kind of see where this team is going. And they continually have to make those strides, right? Like you obviously have to make sure that Dampier is healthy. You've got to make sure that you're getting guys stepping up and that though it is an easier offense to learn, that they're still doing the fundamental things that allow them to get separation, to allow them to be able to work hard, allow them to kind of still have that chip on their shoulder. Because at the end of the day, you can see how quickly these things can unravel. And when one thing goes wrong, whether that be injury or adversity or whatever that may be, it's really easy to kind of spiral and lose a team. So it's really easy to talk about, the good things about Utah right now because they have been good things, right? There hasn't been a lot of bad things. There hasn't been a lot of things where you're looking at this offense and saying, you know what, Utah's really in trouble. I think they've done really well in the transfer portal to rebuild this offense, and so far, based on the commitment level and based on, the dynamic offense that Jason Beck is running, there's a lot of optimism around this. And don't shy away from it, right? Like don't get worried about it or get this false hope that suddenly things are going to change. But that's the nature of football. Things do change in fall. Games have to be played, and sometimes, your plan that you have isn't great. Like that saying is, everybody has a plan until they get smacked in the face, right? That's what Utah has to figure out. Do they have the right people in the right places? I truthfully believe that they do. Now, on the same vein, do you have the right pieces to be able to win games? I still think that they do, and to what level we'll see, right? I'll be curious to see how the rest of this Big 12 shapes up as these spring camps go on. As I've mentioned, we'll go through these games, week by week to talk about them to kind of see how things go. But we'll get a more full picture of who Utah is, what these other teams are, where Utah's fit in these system or in the Big 12 is, and kind of go from there. But I think all in all, be optimistic. I am not here to paint a bad picture necessarily. I think this is a good situation for Utah, and I think it's a good thing to embrace. Now, a few other points from fall camp. As Kyle mentioned, the corner progress. Smith Snowden's locked in at nickel. That's not to say that he can't play on the outside. You heard, or I've talked about earlier, where they said that they want to get him on the outside. They want him to factor in a lot more. I think because of the specialization of nickel and kind of the depth that Utah has at the corner position in terms of, they can get guys they can coach up there better than they can at the nickel spot, especially with some current transfers that have just went in there with Kamari Shemwell. I think this really helps Utah in terms of just being able to have that lockdown, right? So Smith Snowden, you can utilize him in a lot of different sets, whether that be inside, outside, whatever that may be, but I think he's going to continue to be a fixture there, and they're going to find ways to make him involved in the game. There's going to be times, I'm sure, where, they need to move him on the outside, but I think they feel very confident in what he can do at the nickel and his ability. They're not going to waste his talent, and not that putting him at nickel is going to waste it, but they're going to utilize him to the max ability to be able to make sure that he's in there. So, he's there. He's the set guy, arguably one of the best players on the defense, and I think he's going to really have another standout season like he did last year. Opposite on the one side is Scooby Davis. He's seemingly locked down the one side. If you talk to Coach Shaw, nobody's ever locked it down, but I think they feel confident in kind of who he is as a player, and so he's not really the concern. Obviously has experience playing in it last year, did really well there, and so I think as he continues to make strides, they feel confident there. Outside of that, you've got another side of the corner room that they need to be able to figure out. And so Blake Cotton has gotten a lot of reps there. He's done a lot of great things for Utah, and I would say that he's probably the leader of that group. Curious to see how it continues to develop, but comes in with some experience, transfer guy, but he's kind of the leader of that pack. And then, as you heard Kyle say, Don Sanders and LaTristan Thompson, guys that are going to get into that system, that are going to understand it a little bit more in time. But so far, that's still a TBD situation. I would say on the defensive side, this continues to be probably the most vulnerable area. The area where Utah probably doesn't know as much yet about what it can be. If you were to ask them, this is a position group that, when you talk to Morgan Scalley about it, he kind of gets frustrated when you say that Utah's going to be there's a question in the corner or the secondary, whatever that may be, because Utah continues to produce and they continue to do it year after year after year, even after losing guys. So with that in context, I agree with him that they're able to continue to bring in those guys, and they're continuing to produce. But I think the questions right now resort from who's going to be those guys and kind of what is it going to look like, right? Last year, there was a guy that separated himself in Kenan Johnson, and suddenly he had an injury in the first game of the season. That's where it is where you have to develop this depth. So as much as we can sit here and say, oh, Blake Cotton's the guy, and Scooby Davis is the guy, and Smith Snowden's the guy, injuries can, they don't care. They're no respecter of the people that are on the field. And so I think really curious to kind of see the depth and kind of the progress there. It's great to have top-line guys, but what's that depth going to look like? Who are the guys that are going to fill out that spot? We'll see how that goes. So really fascinating to kind of see the development there. I don't know that you'll get a full picture to an extent in spring just simply because of the base defense or the vanilla defenses that they're going to run. But with that said, I think you can get a view of who some of these guys are. We got that in spring last year with some of these guys and kind of showed some hope and optimism. So curious to see there. Lastly, at the end of practice, we got to see Dylan Curtis hit a deep field goal. I clocked it around 52 yards. I was at a wrong angle to really see the yardage, but the interesting thing there is traditionally when they have these guys come on there and they kick these field goals, they go through the full thing, they snap the ball, they have the defense trying to get to him, all that kind of stuff. But this time they had both offensive players and defensive players kind of circling around him to kind of just create this noise and chaos and really try to make it difficult for him. I don't know if he likes that kind of stuff, if this is something that Utah's trying to do to just really get in their heads, but he nailed it. It was pretty easy. Obviously, he's been a phenomenal kicker at the high school level, and I think if Utah can find a way where if a guy like that is making it consistently at 50 yards, if they can feel confident in that, this offense can be even better. And I say that because that gives Kyle Whittingham the ability to be more aggressive, or Jason Beck to be more aggressive, right? They can have situations where last year Utah really didn't want to go for it, even in plus territory, because they were worried that they couldn't get a field goal. Now, even though you're backed up a little further, you can go for it and risk things on fourth downs. Maybe you go for fourth downs more because you understand. Well, in that situation, no, because you want your kicker. But what I'm saying is you can risk things a little bit more where if you don't get it, now you have a guy that can get you some points, right? So curious to see how that goes. Obviously, those fourth down situations don't factor in there, so ignore what I just said there. But I think you can still be more aggressive in how you do things. You can approach things in a different way because it allows you to be able to rely on that. Now, with that said, that can also lend to that point where because you have a guy that is so efficient, do you become less aggressive in some of those situations and don't go for as many fourth downs because you have a guy? Obviously, last year, there needed to be a balance, right? There was times where Utah went for it on fourth down, and they probably should have kicked, but you knew you didn't really have the leg to be able to do it, and so you went for it. This year, Utah has the ability to be able to maybe get those 3 points, get those early points on the board, to be able to kind of settle things when things maybe don't go right. That could have been a world of difference last year where Utah, lost by 3 points, or they needed momentum, and if they would have just kicked, back-to-back field goals instead of trying to go for it on fourth down every single time, maybe things could have changed, right? It's easy to play that woulda, shoulda, coulda game, but I think this bodes well for Utah. So, look, I sit here and I try to say this bodes well for Utah a ton. I don't, that's not how I look at these things, right? Like, I'm not trying to blow smoke up anybody and trying to say that, everything is going to be, rosy perfect or everything. There's a lot of questions with this team, right? But I think just based on the questions that we've had, a lot of these questions are being answered. And I think there's showing a lot of optimism about who this team can be. There's a lot of optimism about the vibe of the team and kind of how everything's going on. And so I think as of right now, there's not really a lot of things to fault, right? It's really easy to kind of have that right now. And we're going to get more into this as the season develops and as we get into fall camp. There are questions that need to be answered. But at the same time, I think this is a good time for Utah fans just to be optimistic, right? Once things get a little bit more into the weeds where you get into fall camp and things get a little bit more serious, yeah, we can take a harder look at that. But I think as of right now, things are going well for Utah, and there's a good reason for Utah fans to be happy. So with that said, we'll end that for the football side of things. Just touch on a few other things. Basketball season's over. The Running Utes lost in their first game of the Crown tournament. It was a microcosm of the season. Let's be honest. Utah got up by 11 points. Things looked good. I even tweeted out that, Utah has a tendency to kind of take the foot off the gas once they get a double-digit lead. And just like that, Utah lost a double-digit lead, played from behind, and then suddenly had to try to play catch-up. And yes, Gabe Madsen hit a three-pointer to tie the game up with a few seconds left in the game, but Utah's defense absolutely kind of collapsed in the post and let the, Butler go score an easy layup, and then Utah took a bad shot at the end to lose the game. And so on one side, obviously, it's good to see the season come to an end because Utah was just holding on for dear life, right? There's a lot of things going on around the team. Obviously, you have a new head coach. You have now 2 new staffers. You've got guys that are trying to figure out their future. There's just a lot of limbo going on that it's time for Utah to kind of move on. And so I think on one hand, it was a great opportunity for Utah to be able to be in an additional tournament, whether you agree with the Crown or not. And look, I don't need to get into that because the reality is it's not the tournament that anybody wants to be in. But in the same vein, this now is an opportunity for Utah to fully immerse in kind of the product that they have. So Alex Jensen, is with the team right now, or at least he has been this week, and trying to kind of figure things out, trying to get things going, trying to get a roster built. He has 2 guys. Obviously, you have an assistant coach from the NBA level. You have a GM from or an assistant GM from the NBA level who is going to be the team's GM. So they've focused in on recruiting, right? That's kind of been their emphasis in trying to get there. And then Alex Jensen will continue to fill out his staff. I do know that he wants to continue to fill out more from an NBA perspective. What that means remains to be seen. The longer it goes on with this Andre Miller stuff, the more, I've heard that it's kind of fizzling behind the scenes. There's a lot more, but it's not there's not much that I can fully report on that one. But I would say, the longer this goes on, probably the more likely it is that Andre Miller is not with the team. And there's reasons, and hopefully I can explain that at a later time. But you're going to see Alex Jensen kind of building out his roster and kind of working with that, but also really trying to get these players, the current players as well as players in the portal figured out. As I was doing this podcast, Keanu Dawes, it was tweeted out that he's withdrawn his name from the portal and is staying with Utah. I think that's a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have him in there with Utah, to be able to make sure that he becomes kind of the focal point in the post. Obviously, they want to fill out more and do things, but I think his upside kind of shows what he can be. And so I think that's a great opportunity for Utah to be able to have him. Utah's been in the mix with a lot of players in the transfer portal, being able to get in there and just at least put their name in there. Some of these guys are because of Rafael Chilius. Some of these guys are, whether it be for Alex Jensen, whatever the case may be, we need to start seeing some names soon. And, I'm curious to see where Alex continues to move forward with and grow with that. So, more things will come there, but we're entering the period where there's not going to be as much outside of just roster building and stuff like that. Another basketball thing, Gianna Neepkins announces that she's transferring from Utah. It's a big blow to Utah. There's no way to put it other than that. But at the same time, she's committed her all to Utah. She's played with the women that she has, where she kind of grew up through the program with them. They all played since they were freshmen, did everything together. She was granted another year of eligibility based on her injury last year. And so she has now an opportunity to be able to have a graduate season, right? Her 5th season. And quite honestly, she wants to go play for a contender. And you can't really fault her for that. I think this is an opportunity for her to recognize that, she can go somewhere that she doesn't have to be the sole focus, right? And I think that was the main reason for not staying at Utah. There's probably other factors, right? And I haven't talked to her, and so it's not like I know the full reasoning, but I know that it's tough to be able to come back into a system where, some players, right? Like there's players on that roster that you still know, but at the same time, I think the load that she would have to bear would be even heavier than what she had this year. And I think that's a challenging thing for an athlete in their senior season or graduate season that you want to go to, right? It's not that she didn't love Utah. She did love Utah. She loves the program. She loves everything about it. But the competitive juices in her wants to be able to do something more, right? You want to be able to go deeper in the NCAA tournament. You want to be a part of something that can be a little deeper. And I don't think there's any, confusion that Utah's, not going to be a heavy favorite to go deep into the NCAA tournament next year with the roster turnovers and stuff that way. So, tough look for Utah, but at the same time, good for Gianna for kind of finding what she needs to do. And, I know people get frustrated with the transfer portal, and I get it. Yeah, especially with somebody like her who has meant so much to Utah and has been so efficient, but that's kind of the nature of what it is. Outside of that, the Red Rocks have their regionals this week. If you get a chance to be able to go to those are a great opportunity to see postseason gymnastics. This is where things really matter. Utah looking to make it to their 49th. Now I don't have that number with me, but they've been to every single national championship appearance since it's been, the NCAA's created it. And so Utah's going for another season. The regional, that they're hosting lays out very well for them. Utah is the number 4 seed, and so they got a pretty favorable draw. They will compete against Denver, Stanford, and the winner of BYU and Utah State, who compete tonight in a play-in meet. That in and of itself is a pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's a good meet for Utah to kind of get out of the way. They've already competed against Denver a couple times, obviously competed against Stanford last year, and then BYU and Utah State, whomever gets past that first play-in meet. Obviously they've competed against them multiple times this year and has done well. On the other session is UCLA, Minnesota, Southern Utah, and Boise State. This lends itself well to have a competition where Utah and UCLA move on to the nationals. But anything can happen, and it's not always the easiest situation for teams as they get into this spot. But Utah has really been hitting its stride lately. Things haven't always been perfect, but at the same time, they have the ability to be able to win, and they have the ability to win a national championship this year. So we'll see what it looks like. I think these should be some fun meets. The fact that you get the potential to have Utah and UCLA, two rivals for as long as we can remember, in a potential regional final at the Huntsman Center is pretty special for Utah. So we saw how incredible that night was when they closed out the season against each other on senior night. But this has a lot more weight on it. So UCLA has also had some phenomenal meets where they scored incredibly high, in the Big Ten championship. This I will point out, and one last thing is this regional has a ton of conference champions. You've got Utah, who won the Big 12. You've got Stanford that won the ACC. You've got Utah State that won the Mountain West. You have Southern Utah. I'm blanking on their affiliation, but they won theirs. And then you get UCLA that won the Big Ten. So you have 5 conference champions competing on Thursday. And I'm curious to see how many of those move on to the finals and everything that way. So really cool opportunity. But I think this has been a fun season for the Red Rocks, and I think there's a true potential to be able to have a championship within their reach. So with that, we're going to call it a day. We'll try to get back more with some football stuff, and we'll kind of hit that heavily and kind of go into more of the sports around Utah athletics. But with that, we'll call it a day, and have a good one.